I am Frederick Philip von Weiss, and thank you so much for consuming the Thunder Nerds, a conversation with the people behind the technology that love what they do and do tech good. Um, Before we get going, I first want to thank our sponsor. We have the good people at Auth0 as our exclusive sponsor this year. They make it easy for developers to build a custom, secure, and standard-based unified login by providing authentication and authorization as a service. So if you could, please go check them out at auth0.com. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Auth0. So with that being said, and without any further ado, let's go ahead and welcome our guest. We have podcaster, Senior Director, Product Strategy at Oracle, Preston So. Welcome to the show, Preston.
Thanks, Frederick. It's a real pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. And where are you joining us from exactly?
So today I'm joining you from New York City, and I'm not sure where this noise is coming from at the moment, but New York City is a very noisy place, so very sorry about the interruptions. But yeah, I've been in New York City and I've been here for about, a long time now, and a great city to be in.
That's cool. What's a long time? Where are you actually from? Are you from somewhere else? You're not from New York?
I'm originally from Colorado, actually. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Colorado Springs, Colorado, which is where I got my hands first dirty with code, and then went over to the East Coast to go to college and also to work and live in New York, which has always been a bit of a dream of mine ever since I was a kid.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the place to make it, right? There's so many great minds gathering in one location. You could only I don't know if it's possible to not kind of absorb the culture and the technology and everyone's aspirations and passion through osmosis when you're in a place like that, right?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that really draws me to New York, I'm a huge foodie. So one of the things I really enjoy doing is discovering new restaurants, looking for cuisines that are really difficult to find. One of the things that I did this morning actually was I trawled a little bit because one of the kind of cuisines that I've been hoping to try very soon, and it's not really in my neighborhood, it's not really in any of the kind of areas that I spend a lot of time in, but New York is actually very famous for its Uzbek and Central Asian cuisine. And so that's one of the things that I've been seeking out. I made a little list of some of the restaurants I want to go to. And New York City is really, I can't really see myself living anywhere else because, it's such a wonderful place. You meet all sorts of different people. One of the things I really like about New York is just the fact that everyone has such a different experience, different background, such cultural richness in the city. And of course, it doesn't hurt that politically it's very close to where I stand as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how has it been, speaking of New York, how's it been with like the cultural situation, what's going on right now? Add COVID on top of that. What's the atmosphere right now in the environment? And let me also preface that from my understanding that New York, the numbers of COVID have been dropping, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. New York obviously has been, the sort of nexus of a lot of different things lately. Of course, we had a very, really tough time with COVID here in New York City. I think one of the things that, really struck me though was the fact that the city really came together to help each other out, to support each other. One of the things that I love to see is all of these mutual aid networks really working hard to ensure that more of those, that aid gets to where it needs to go, the support in terms of food, in terms of groceries for our neighbors who are have compromised immune systems or have issues with being able to go out there and actually shop for the things that they need. And I think during the height of the COVID pandemic, especially when it was really at the apex of the kind of high case count here in New York, it was a really challenging time. I think a lot of New Yorkers who stayed in the city, really share that kind of sentiment of it was a really, really hard time for everyone here in New York. Also, we had sort of that other, over the course of the last few weeks, obviously we've had a lot of protests and a lot of action happening out there in terms of, trying to honor the memories of of people who have fallen at the hands of police, especially folks, like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and Tony McDade, all these people. And now, of course, we have other names to add to the list over the course of the last few weeks. One thing that's been really good to see here is that, New York City has been at the very forefront of really advocating for and fighting against some of the really, pernicious and awful racism and structural racism and oppression that we see, around the world and also in our country. One of the things that I was hoping to do was to join one of the protests. There was a very large protest a couple of Fridays ago over here at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. But one of the things that I think is really tough, and one of the things that I've struggled with is, that kind of dilemma between, being an activist, going out there, protesting, making sure that our voices are heard, but at the same time keeping ourselves and keeping, of course, our friends and loved ones in our life safe from some of the complications of COVID-19.
Yeah, it's very difficult because if you are in one of those situations where you're going to go out and protest, even if everybody's wearing masks, and thank God a lot of people are, it's bringing the risk down dramatically, but there's still a lot of people in a lot of other locations that are not. Like, for example, I'm in Florida and we have people that are advocating for not wearing masks, where it's clear science that just wear a mask. Just please wear a mask. You could see the places that are saying like, oh, we're not going to wear a mask, and you could see it just dramatically ticking up and up exponentially, and the logic is baffling, if you even want to call it logic.
Yeah, and one thing that I know that a lot of my friends here and a lot of my colleagues in New York City share, and all over the tri-state, is kind of abject terror. Because one of the things that you might know about, Frederick, is that a lot of New Yorkers travel to Florida to escape the epidemic here in New York, and now they're all coming back because they're all scared of what's happening, in Florida. And so I think now the fear levels here are starting to ratchet back up. I'm trying to spend this weekend doing all the things I want to do out and about, and get my hair cut, for example. As you might have noticed, I've got a pretty nice toupee here, and trying to get everything out of the way so that I can go right back into lockdown.
I hear you. I actually did a big haircut. See last episode for my COVID beard. But anyway, yes, I'm also a Jersey boy, and I moved down here when I was a kid, and as a lot of people did coming to Florida, so I could definitely relate on that end. So how are you doing with your remote work? A lot of people, we don't think about everyone's situation. Not everybody has a large home. Not everybody has a partner that is willing to put up with them, or being on the phone all day if that's their a requirement of their job. A lot of people in bigger cities such as New York have small apartments because you live there and you go out to experience the city. It's not so much about your apartment. And now everybody's stuck, or for a good amount of them, right, working remotely. So what's your experience like, and how have you been dealing with it?
Yeah, it's a great question. To be honest, it's been ups and downs. I think it's been ups and downs for everyone, kind of, a bit of a roller coaster, a bit of a kind of challenge for everyone. I've never been one to work from home. I don't know about you, but I've never been one to successfully be able to focus and motivate myself and get that drive I need to really put in a good day's work at home. And I think a lot of it is what, that kind of qualm a lot of people share, which is that the TV's right there, the beer's in the fridge right behind me. I've got some other things, I've got my video games over here. I've got my books over here. It's a really hard thing to do. And so, it's funny because whenever I used to work from home or work remotely, a lot of people don't know this about me, but when I say I'm working from home or working remotely, before this whole pandemic started, I was usually, working from cafes or working from, places where there were, where there was Wi-Fi, where I could see other people working and I wouldn't be distracted by things at home. And so the first few weeks were definitely a struggle. I will say I've never really been able to successfully set up a workstation at home, but it was a really great kind of endeavor for me because, I didn't really have any kind of office at home that was set up. My desk was covered in all the stuff that I would pack for my travels. And, I had my passport there and all of my other kind of things there for my travel, but I would never use it as an actual place to work.
Sure.
So it's been nice to actually, kind of get into that headspace and regain a little bit of what I had lost in terms of being able to do that kind of work from home.
Yeah, I think part of it is what you kind of highlighted there is setting up the right environment to actually work from home. I remember there was a story that Jason Ogle told me on his show a while ago about how he was working from home and he was made a mistake of working in his bed when he was working remote, and he actually fell asleep while he was working in his bed and got a call, and there was, it goes on from there. And it was a bad story, but like don't make sure you're working in you're going to have an easier time if you work in a spot in your home where that's your dedicated area. You have a dedicated area for sleep. You have a dedicated area like a table where you might eat some food, have a meal, and do the same thing with work. Maybe that it's somewhere else if you have that affordance in your life to be able to have different locations within whatever square footage you have. But it's interesting how that works. So why don't we talk a little bit about your actual work? Let's talk about your day-to-day. So you are, and maybe not everybody knows exactly what you do. So you're Senior Director Product Strategy at Oracle. We've all heard of Oracle. Everybody thinks probably of data as the first thing. What exactly does that mean? What does your title mean? And let's dive into what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of folks might not know this, but I've spent the better part of about 12 or 13 years in the content management world. CMS, content management systems, and my specialty has long been over the past, I would say, about 5 to 6 years, has really been around how content management systems can really provide the underpinnings and the foundation for a really rich variety of different experiences that content goes to. And so the actual work I do is kind of interesting. One thing you might not know about Oracle, is that obviously we do a lot of work with databases. We do a lot of work with, kind of that back-end software. You might know Oracle because of Java, for example, or GraalVM, or some of these other amazing projects that we have. But one thing you might not know as much about Oracle is that we also have a variety of products that are really great for teams that are working on content, teams that are working on design, teams that are working on other elements of sort of this new digital world that we live in. And one of those is, of course, Oracle's own content management system, which is called Oracle CX Content. And it's part of our customer experience suite of products. And what I do as part of that team is, I work on developer experience features. I work on our developer relations programs. I also do a lot of strategy work for our strategy around headless CMSs, how we're actually competing in kind of this new world of more sort of API-driven or API-only CMSs, as well as the kind of open source strategy that we want to do. One thing that Oracle isn't known as much for, and I think this has been true ever since the start of Oracle, is that Oracle has never really been known as an open source company. And it's never really been known as a company that sustains and maintains and provides and offers a variety of different open source libraries and products and projects and ecosystems. So that's part of my prerogative as well, is that one of the things that I work on at Oracle is to push forward our open source ecosystem. I do a lot of work on our own developer ecosystem to make sure that we're providing some really great open source tools for our developer audience. And yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. I do wish I got to travel more than I am now. That's a big part of my job, obviously, as part of my developer relations kind of responsibilities, is to go and talk at conferences, present, and share some of this knowledge that we really have started to work on and really fleshed out. So.
What are you doing now to supplement that? How are you getting the word out rather than travel? What's part of your responsibility, I guess, is what I'm asking, to provide that message, whereas you would have normally jumped on a plane, went somewhere, and did some evangelizing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think everyone who works in developer relations, everyone who's a developer advocate, everyone who is even who just loves conferences and attends conferences is really feeling a lot of grief and pain right now. Yeah, and I think despite the fact that we're speaking virtually right now, live on YouTube, I have the feeling that you and I both share a bit of a preference more for in-person conferences than virtual conferences.
Very much.
I find these virtual conferences to be very exhausting, and I find that it's just really hard when you don't have anyone in front of you to really know how people are reacting or kind of thinking about what you're saying. So, over the course of the last few months, I've really shifted gears. I've moved away from just working on talks and just working on things that really require me to be in person with people. And, rather I've been focusing much more on better leveraged media for people who are stuck at home, people who are, stuck with their families and are having to work in remote teams. And that means I'm doing a lot of blogging. I'm doing a lot of, recording of tutorial videos. I'm also doing a great deal of writing for other outlets. And I'm also working on a book right now as well. So all those sorts of projects are helping me to kind of offset how much I miss being in that conference space.
Yeah, a lot of the things that are just so advantageous are the things that take place outside of the conference. We just had a show about this 2 or 3 shows ago with a bunch of people from conferences that we met and talked to. I think we had like 14 people on there. But the thing that we were highlighting is that the things that you get from just going up to people and having a personal conversation like, hey, what technology are you currently interested? What have you been doing? How does this relate to this? Let me hear about some of your side projects, like little things like that. Or, oh, hey, isn't the conference food really great today? I can't believe they wrap bacon around hot chocolate, crazy stuff, whatever. It's like that kind of personal stuff. It's so, you get so much more from that. There's a lot of value to that.
No, it's so true. And it's very funny you mentioned that because, one thing that I'm sure you've seen from my background is that I've also spent a good amount of time, probably about 13, 14 years in the Drupal community, the Drupal open source a content management system kind of ecosystem. And one of the things that's really interesting about DrupalCon, which is the global conference, is that everyone's favorite part of the conference is always what we call the hallway track, where you catch up with friends, you ask, and you have these chats that are very much ancillary to and orthogonal to a lot of the conference content, but can still foster a lot of innovation. Actually, the conference that I work on here in New York City came out from one of those conversations. And it's just an incredible source of innovation. I think a lot of folks, when they go to conferences, they think that it's all about the talks, it's all about, the sorts of sponsors they get to meet in the exhibit hall, but it's really, really about the kinds of conversations you have on the side. And especially those kinds of small talk conversations that can really lead to some interesting discussions and some interesting outcomes.
Absolutely. A lot of people think like, well, I could just watch a video of said subject online. Of course you can. That is not the point. As you just outlined, that there's so much value in having that handshake, post and after COVID, post and before COVID, I guess, and then having those kind of conversations that are so rich with details about what's going on with that person and the industry that lead to other things that, that just basic life kind of textures that you don't get from watching a video, I guess.
It's so true. It's so true. And I think that's one of the kind of multimodal ways that you can really take advantage of conferences. It's not, it's about every single way of interacting with people that makes a conference so great. I couldn't agree more.
It's interacting and engaging and having an actual conversation with a human being. There's the value. So Drupal, how the heck did you get into Drupal? Drupal, I think for some people currently might think it's kind of passe, or some people might think, hey, I love Drupal. I'm totally into Drupal. There could be people on 7, there could be people waiting for 9. There could be people that we'll get into the subject of building it into like some form of headless CMS, like you were talking about, or you do talk about in your book, using Gatsby and GraphQL and getting the data that way and pushing it into Gatsby and so forth. And again, we'll dive into that. But how did you actually get into Drupal initially? Are you like a Drupal 5 guy and went forth?
Yeah, you actually got it exactly right. It was Drupal 5. And my past and sort of my background in content management is really unusual. One of the things that I actually, I never really started out with CMSs at the very beginning. My first programming language was actually Visual Basic way back in 1999. And 2 years later, I started hearing a lot about sort of the ways in which the web was going to totally reinvent programming and totally reinvent the ways in which we build software and all of these things. And I thought, really interesting. And I started getting more and more into certain aspects of web design. One of the things that was happening right around that era, around 2001, 2002, right when I was just getting started with web design, was CSS was finally becoming a properly supported language. It wasn't just table-based layouts. It wasn't just font tags. It wasn't just all caps HTML. It was this kind of enriching experience to be able to come into the web design world right as this incredible revolution was happening. And I got to really work in the space of web standards for many years, and I worked very, I had a blog back then actually that was very much, supportive of web standards and very much, a proponent of the fact that we're now introducing CSS-based layouts and these more well-accepted techniques and more robust techniques for building websites. But then what happened was, interestingly enough, I joined an agency very early in my high school years that specialized in Drupal. And one day, I was primarily coming in as a designer. I was coming in as a web designer, graphic designer, print designer, and I was also doing a lot of photo and video restoration and post-production. And one of the things that obviously I share is that I have web design experience, web development experience, and they asked me, hey, we found this really interesting thing. It's called Drupal 5. It's this really cool tool. It could be really great for our customers. Can you take a look and tell us what you think? And the rest is history, as they say. I got involved into my first. I got into my first Drupal project when I was it was the year 2007, and so that year was kind of like the first time I really discovered open source, as kind of this amazing, not only architectural or engineering paradigm, but actually much more related to the community itself and the more human aspects of software development. And I got very immersed in the Drupal community. I got very involved and went through Drupal 5, Drupal 6, Drupal 7, Drupal 8 all the way. It's still a very, very important part of my career and my life. But the thing that I would say about Drupal that's really interesting, and the thing that really kind of changed a lot of my impressions of the way that the web could work is the fact that what we were seeing with Drupal and what we were seeing with a lot of these emerging CMSs like WordPress and some of these other tools that came out was really this unprecedented level of manipulability and engagement that editorial teams and content teams and other teams could have in a no-code way. The fact that Drupal introduced for the very first time this idea of no-code content modeling, something that WordPress also touts, was an incredible step away from some of the more glorified blogging tools or discussion boards, and also away from some of the WYSIWYG software back then, like Front Page, like Adobe Dreamweaver. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Going back to Macromedia days.
Oh yeah.
Macromedia.
Yeah. It's kind of funny to see how far we've come. And one of the things I find really interesting is talking to developers who are coming into the industry today and coming into the world today, because they don't know that things like Firebug and DevTools didn't exist back in the day. They didn't know that back in the day you had to go and test every single browser on multiple versions and really look at every single pixel. And they also don't know that, back in the day, one of the things that we had to do was to, really fight against some of the proprietary browser additions to the specification they were trying to add. So, I think that one of the things I like to tell a lot of the developers I work with or people that I know are newer to our industry is, y'all are extremely lucky. Y'all have the luxury of all of these amazing tools and all these amazing autocomplete, all these amazing debugging tools, and all these amazing task runners and test runners that we simply didn't have access to back in the DHTML days, or back in the jQuery days, or back in the, God forbid, the all caps HTML days.
Yeah, I would have loved to have VS Code back then, and anything else. Yeah, I mean, just think about people would hand you a Photoshop file and say, make this. But yeah, Drupal had so much power, and it still does. It has so much power compared to things like back in the day where you'd look at something like WordPress, which had two content types really out of the box, which was a post and a page. And then Drupal had no rules. It was a tool to build a CMS. You built all your, okay, this is the taxonomy I want. This is the content types I want. I could bring in different things like context, and I could push everything on with a view and have everything display with a view, and make these templates, and the templates, these TPLs, just execute everything I want perfectly. Like, it was a way too to clean out your code where, you might have built or customized a WordPress template, but in Drupal, it seemed, at least to me, in my experience, it seemed so much easier to go into Drupal and make a theme, cut things out, set my regions, make a few views, put a tag, and boop. And I had like anything I wanted, and it was easy to set it up as a CMS for a client.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better. It's such an incredible product, and I think it's good to see how much of a role model I think Drupal has been for a lot of the newer products that we're seeing, and some of the newer approaches that we're seeing, and some of the new ideas that we're seeing as well. And I think it's a very exciting time for some of the as we see, right, there's always these kinds of historical trends that really point towards ways in which we're going to reinvent how we actually innovate in the web. And I'm very, very proud of my work in the Drupal community, my work in the Drupal ecosystem, both code and non-code, to really kind of foster this continuous innovation that not only provides a great future for Drupal itself, but also maps out this amazing kind of range of possibilities for the other CMSs out there and the other content products out there.
So I want to get to the part about your book and what you're writing about here, which is your current book that you have out. And we'll get into the new book a little bit. Maybe you could tease that a little. But the Decoupled Drupal in Practice. So with this, we're talking about something such as like taking Drupal data as a headless CMS, pushing it to GraphQL to get the data. GraphQL takes the data to Gatsby. Gatsby, we use a React template at that point, and Bob's your uncle, kind of the flow. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So why don't we first go at a very high level to help explain this for people that might not understand the whole headless CMS and decoupling. What does that mean?
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of terms tossed around. There's decoupled, there's headless, there's API first, there's hybrid headless, there's, all these sorts of terms that are out there. And they all kind of mean the same thing. There are slight nuances, slight differences. You might read that there's some kind of a definition of decoupled in CMS Wire that differs from a different definition of headless. There's a lot of different kinds of terminology that people are using, but fundamentally at its core, a decoupled or a headless content management system is leveraging that content management system's data and the content that's contained therein as a service, so that you can actually leverage other systems and create other pieces of software that consume that data. One really good example of this is, many people have a website. And that could be in Drupal, that could be in any kind of CMS that you can imagine. It could be a WordPress site. But what happens when you've got a need to serve data to a mobile application, or you want to be able to provide a really nice experience for augmented reality or virtual reality, but that needs to be something that is a single rendition of content. One of the things that a lot of people talk about is content reuse and being able to write once and publish everywhere. And this is a really important topic in CMS in general, not just for websites and web applications, but also for all channels in general. And I think one of the things that's really important to remember about kind of the headless CMS is that it's this increasingly interesting paradigm because of the fact that there's not only this notion of more modern front-end development experiences, as you mentioned, Frederick, around Gatsby and some of the really interesting API-driven approaches that people have now to expose and consume their data. One you mentioned was, for example, the GraphQL kind of specification and how that query language is really changing the world. But then there's another side to it, which is exactly the no-code side of it, which is how can we make sure that these content management systems are ready, not just for the websites that they're originally designed for, but also for all of these new kinds of form factors and devices and screens and experiences and all these different kinds of ways in which people are using and consuming content. And this is especially more relevant right now because of the fact that the pandemic has forced us all into lockdown. We're stuck at home. We're working remotely. We're not consuming content normally. We're not able to necessarily use the same kinds of devices or work in the same ways that we were before. And someone might be using a voice assistant more often now, or using their smartwatch more often now, because that's simply what they have right next to them, and it's more convenient than going over to a computer or going over to some other place. So that I went into a bit of a tangent there, but at its core, this kind of idea of a decoupled CMS or a headless CMS is, rather than using the end-to-end capabilities of the software, meaning everything from the database out to the delivery of that data out to templates, everything from the templates to how that actually gets rendered out and how that gets flushed out to the browser, rather than leverage the CMS for every single one of those inextricably linked concerns that can't be separated from one another within the context of a traditional or a monolithic content management system, what we're saying is, let's just leverage the part that is really crucial for data delivery and data formation and data handling, and then let's let a different player come in and hand the baton over, pass the baton, let them go sprinting off in the other direction with their own kinds of implementation, and best practices and certain ideas about how this should work. And it's exactly like you just mentioned. One of the things that we see very often is, obviously, many people are leveraging Drupal as that kind of underlying API. I do, as a matter of fact, for my own website. And then, they're able to leverage something like GraphQL to serve that data out to a more potentially richer or a potentially more modern or more developer-friendly experience than the one that's part and parcel of the CMS.
And you also have the advantage of changing what that might be, depending on where those links in the chain are in the technology. There might be something that you go, you know what, we have the data over here. Now we want to do something else over there. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
As a point.
Absolutely. I think, one of the things that I think you illustrated it perfectly. The notion of flexibility is so big in terms of the CMS. It's no longer the case that you're kind of stuck with what the CMS gives you. Like, a lot of us have been kind of worried about the fact that a lot of the templating or theming or front-end development approaches that are part of WordPress or part of Drupal, very much like what you alluded to earlier in terms of the fact that there's only 2 content types in WordPress. Those sorts of limitations are things that developers are increasingly chafing against, especially in the JavaScript world. And one of the things that I think we'll start to see is exactly that notion of, hey, I've got my Drupal site, but hey, I'm going to decouple it so that I can start to use React. But React is kind of old news now. Why don't I go over and replace that with Svelte? But I've still got all of my content and all my data and all of my business logic still wrapped up in one location, one single repository, which is the CMS. I just got to take out the front end itself and substitute it for something else that I might like.
Yeah, the flexibility, just that alone is amazing. And then, of course, the security, because if you're going to take that and push it out to something that spits out a flat file, if somebody's trying to hack your website, for example, you have a flat file. What are they going to do to the HTML?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's one of the kind of key concerns that a lot of folks have these days is, how do you protect your website when if you get into a single layer of your CMS, you immediately have access to potentially the entire CMS, which means that your entire architecture is now compromised. It's not just about the database, having a SQL injection go in there or having potentially some cross-site scripting because of your, Ajax. It's actually fundamentally something that could compromise the entirety of your content architecture. And I think that's one of the big key reasons why people are moving towards, especially the Jamstack, where we're talking about unhackable, literally unhackable static files. It's almost like we're going back to the future, back to the 1990s, where it's true, you FTP. The only way you can hack flat files is to FTP into them. There's no real way to kind of hack a flat file. It's not a constantly running server. It's not an active database. And one of the things I think a lot of people are worried about these days, and I know is a lot of anxiety that is shared in the Drupal community and the WordPress community, is how do we deal with the increasing frequency of these security vulnerabilities where, you're seeing more SQL injection possibilities, you're seeing more, XSS vulnerabilities, and these are happening more and more often, partially because of the fact that Drupal and WordPress are so popular, but also because of the fact that they are open source and also that they are monolithic. And so the notion of decoupling an architecture, I think, in terms of security is more of a recent trend. I've definitely noticed more recently that this notion of leveraging a headless or a decoupled architecture for security reasons is actually a very, very compelling motivation now as well.
So let's talk about something that's not off subject, but actually very relevant to what you just said. Is as somebody in a company, let's say your book. Let me preface your book. The audience for your book, is it fair to say, is developers?
I would say that, yeah, architects, developers, yeah.
Okay, so that being said, what if someone like a marketing director, right? They're trying to sell this this idea, this logic to their C-levels and ups, what have you. How do they consume this concept? How are they going to get their heads around, oh, okay, you know what? I have a small team of developers, and I heard this is a great way to do these kind of things. I would like to do this moving forward. I think there's probably a lot of trepidation with small teams, right? To say, we were doing all this fine and Drupal just the way it is. Let's not rock the boat. This is out of scope. How do we get this kind of logic and this pattern, this future pattern, moving forward with that kind of team?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think you've really touched on one of the most intractable problems that I think the content management industry itself and the market faces. One of the biggest issues that any marketing team or any small content team faces is that they are not only contending with potentially a CMS product that is a little bit more antiquated or out of date, but they're also dealing with the fact that their customer base and their users are increasingly demanding that they have these digital experiences that go well beyond the website. They want to be able to use mobile. They want to be able to use smartwatches. They want to use their smart TV to get to content. They want to use AR, VR applications or voice or beacon-driven content. There's all sorts of new and emerging kinds of innovative front ends that are now experiencing new presentation layers that are now appearing. And it's actually causing a great deal of hand-wringing, I would say, among content teams. And there's two reasons for this. The first is that there's a big reason why headless CMSs have really become popular. And the primary rationale, I would say, and the main reason why we saw this initial wave of adoption of these new CMS architectures, and especially these new products that have emerged, is the fact that developers weren't happy and dissatisfied with the technologies that they were working with. In Drupal, we had PHP template. It's been forever since I themed WordPress, so I don't remember exactly how it does it on WordPress. But I've also worked with Django, for example, and some of the ways in which these CMSs do presentation management or visual management or visual rendering is something that is so foreign to the developers today who are working with JavaScript paradigms and server-side rendering, universal JavaScript, Jamstack best practices as well. But there's two very different audiences that are struggling right now. And, obviously the developers have said, we're done. We're going to move on into our own kind of approach. We're going to leverage a headless CMS. And if you have a tech savvy team, or if you have a really great consultancy as a partner, that's okay, right? Because if you've got a very, very technical team, you can go ahead and custom build your front end and your presentation layer. And that's a really, really great kind of outcome for developer teams and for engineering teams. But not everyone has access to an IT team. Not everyone has access to a consultancy. Not everyone has access to even the engineer that's sitting across the office. And one of the things that I find really striking about the ways in which the headless CMS has become adopted is the fact that fundamentally you still need the developer. And so there's another side of this as well, which is that the marketing organizations, the legal teams, the compliance groups, the project and product managers, all the folks who don't write the code, who aren't developers, who are very much important fixtures in content collaboration in the CMS, but don't write code, they're finding themselves left behind. And one of the things that I always like to say is that most software deals with just one single audience or one single persona. The browser deals with the end user. Okay, there's a developer with dev tools, but primarily it's about the end user. If you look at CRM tools, right, they're primarily for people who are working with customer success or working with customers on a daily basis. But the CMS is really unique because there's a huge amount of people who are coming into the CMS who have very different needs. When you think about the fact that a lawyer might be logging into a CMS because they're looking for HIPAA compliance to make sure that certain pharmaceutical information is above the fold. Or they might be making sure that there's cookie compliance because they're reviewing compliance for GDPR. But how does that work in an environment where now you have to rely on the developers as a bottleneck to provide all of the information you need to be able to preview this content or analyze your content or really interact with other users in a meaningful way? And so the marketing teams, the sort of legal teams, the compliance teams, the product teams are really chafing at headless CMSs because yes, they understand, based on all these white papers coming out from folks like Forrester and Gartner, that headless CMSs are great for performance, great for interactive user experiences, great for security. But where is the layout management? Where is the drag and drop? Where is the in-place editing? And where are some of these tools? Not just those kinds of things, right? Because those are very, very visually in context oriented kinds of interfaces. But even simpler kinds of things that are very important to, especially marketing teams that are very focused on SEO or personalization or even something as simple as Google Analytics. How do you change a URL, or how do you change a navigation menu? How do you change, let's say, the ordering of certain content? How do you make sure that you can update a certain link to a different URL? How does that happen when you're dealing with experiences that are built entirely by the developer? And so one of my biggest concerns about this, and this is the final point that I'll share, is that one of the things I think we need to see is a new balance, this sort of new equilibrium. And I said this yesterday actually to a CMS expert. I said, what we really need is a democratization of the developer experience in the same way that we had the democratization of the editorial experience or the no-code user experience 20 years ago. It's the same exact thing that we need to do right now. The pendulum has just swung in the opposite direction.
Yeah, you make a really great point there. So we need something possibly like a as a service, a AAS, something like that, to where somebody that doesn't have the greatest understanding of this could easily execute something like with quickness as well, to where they could stack up something as far as here's my CMS. And here's my full solution. Like do we have some kind of full solution out there that does everything, to where it's a headless CMS It's all these things. It has all my templating in it, kind of like it looks like one of these WordPress things, like a super WordPress service, if you will, that has everything built in, but it's still headless. It's decoupled in a way, and it does all these things that we want. And it spits out flat files. Is there something that we're just missing to get to that point, and where we could cross and go, okay, now everybody's doing this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of quandary. One of the things that I would say is that I think the idea, that kind of utopian notion of a single service that can sort of solve all of these problems for these users who aren't writing code. That's a very lofty goal and a very I think a very intriguing mission. I just think that one of the challenges we face, of course, is that CMSs in the back in the day, as you mentioned earlier, only had to deal with HTML back in the day. They were only really concerned about some of the kind of website markup, the web only kinds of ideas that CMSs have long played in the sandbox with. But today, what we're seeing now is, not only is there JavaScript in terms of, React and React Native and, Electron and some of these other really interesting, but also we're seeing increasingly newer languages, newer presentation approaches, newer front-end frameworks emerge that are really challenging because they diversify the constellation of different technologies that these people need to serve. One of the examples of this, of course, is languages like Dart. Dart is obviously very popular now. Flutter uses it. Now, and then of course, what's going to happen when WASM enters the picture in full force with WebAssembly? Once WebAssembly becomes really well supported across browsers, how is that going to challenge the primacy of JavaScript? And how is that going to also introduce a lot more challenges for CMSs? CMSs are at a really, really tough spot right now because they've been playing in this HTML world, they've been in this web-only space, but now they're having to contend with all of these different CMSs. And I think it's not going to just be one service. I think it's going to have to be a range of services, a range of patterns, a range of approaches that are going to be very challenging to figure out.
I agree, but I could definitely see if you could make this. I think there's a need, maybe a pain point out there, and if somebody could solve that, I think there's a great opportunity for a business there or a service, what have you, to make something like this available for teams to kind of turnkey and go, because these teams need a CMS and they just need to go for some of these.
It's very funny you say that because we're working on this right now with Oracle CX Content and our own CMS. So keep an eye on us.
All right, yeah, please. Where can people go to find out more about that?
One place you can go to find out more is obviously oracle.com. Has a lot of information about our CMS product. There's also a lot of information that I have on my blog about sort of our work on that. There's also a large amount of documentation. One of the things that is, so one thing I will say about Oracle is that, we have a lot of different products and a lot of different documentation, a lot of information. But if you just search for Oracle CX Content or Oracle Content and Experience Headless CMS documentation, you'll find our full range of tutorials that we're adding, every single week, new tutorials to our SDKs, sort of our CLI tools as well that really help to accelerate, React development. We're working on Gatsby right now. We've got Flutter also coming down the chute, as well as some other frameworks. And one of our goals is to provide these amazing boilerplate foundations for developers who really want to integrate deeply with the CMS, who recognize that this is an important concern. And our goal eventually is to really bring these two currently separated by an abyss, parties together into this new kind of centralization of content collaboration in a way that really hasn't happened over the course of the last 5 years or so, I would say.
Wow, that's really exciting. I'm very excited to see that. That's okay. Really cool stuff coming up.
Absolutely. We'll see.
I've been talking to your ear off, asking you questions. I want to make sure that I provide an opportunity here for you to talk about your book. This came out in
Sure.
2019. Am I correct?
Yeah, it was right. It was right around. It's funny because the pre-order started December 2018. So I usually say 2018, but the actual book, the first book delivered and printed was in 2019. Yep.
Okay, so decoupled Drupal in practice. Is there anything you want to tell people that, obviously we talked a lot about the subject, but anything that we didn't talk about the subject, anything that you want to share to help get the word out about this book, communicate some of the value points?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, one thing I want to share is that currently my book is on sale until July 1st. It's 20% off with the code SO Drupal. And it's only on Springer Nature. If you go to springer.com and search for Decoupled Drupal in practice, and I'm sure we can also share the link here. It's currently on sale, so you can get it for 20% off. It's an amazing sale, but it's only while supplies last. There is kind of a limited quantity, so that's going on until July 1st. Oh, it's So Drupal, SO Drupal. So SODRUPAL.
Perfect. Yeah, and we'll have all that in the show notes, everyone. And anything else too that you want to add in the show notes, Preston, go ahead and add to this document. We'll make sure that we have that in there for everybody.
Sure thing.
The other thing I want to talk to you about is you hinted that you have a new book that is possibly coming out soon, or you're working on. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I was kind of, I was kind of wondering, like, when would be the right moment to kind of share news about this book. I haven't really mentioned it. I've sort of talked about it in passing, saying I'm working on a book, but I've never actually revealed what it's about or shared, anything about.
Here's the moment.
So you just landed a huge scoop, and it's an exclusive, yeah. I am currently working on a book for A Book Apart. You might know A Book Apart from the legendary Bibles on responsive web design, on SVG, on animation, an amazing series of books. But my focus in particular is going to be on how to enable voice-driven content. Voice content strategy for voice, information architecture for voice, design for voice content, as well as usability and accessibility as well. So that book it's going to be a little while. It's in progress right now. I've got it, quite a lot of it done now, and it's going to be an incredible kind of addition to the literature out there on conversational design, which is a really, really amazing space right now, because there's so many exciting kinds of ideas and exciting concepts that are now emerging, but it's very much a new and immature space, and there's so many things that have to be figured out. So that'll be coming most likely next year.
Oh, that's great. Okay, I'm super excited. Yeah, conversational design is just fascinating. The whole. Do you mind just maybe just explaining for the audience that might not understand it, just in brevity, really quick?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and I found it interesting because in reviewing the show notes earlier, I saw that one of the things that a lot of people compare conversational design to is material design. It's a very interesting kind of idea. I'm really interested in the kind of very big picture notion of conversational design. And that is basically, how do we provide really great user experiences that are usable and accessible and inclusive and equitable for chatbots and for Slack bots and text bots and Facebook Messenger bots and conversational forums. But my interest, because I worked on this actually when I was at Acquia, where I worked on Drupal and worked on some of these really interesting applications for Drupal, I really got into voice. Because when it comes to conversational design, which is really about how do you take all of the things that we normally do with our interfaces, whether it's conducting a transaction or executing an action or buying something or searching for something, how do we translate all of those kinds of interaction patterns and all of those kinds of things that we do on a transactional or informational basis over to the conversational context in a more interlocutory or a more dialogic way, where instead of clicking a button to submit, or instead of hitting the search text box, I'm actually giving my query verbally to an interface, or actually asking the interface to do something on my behalf without actually using any of my artificial keyboard or mouse or tools that I would normally have at my disposal. And in that sense, I would say one of the things that I think is very important about conversational design is that it is fundamentally a very human endeavor, because you're talking about conversation, which is one of the very, very primordial things that we as a species do. And so, I think that voice is a very interesting space because it totally scrambles all of our preconceived notions of not only, some of the things that we do with our interfaces, but also content. How do you expose content in a voice format? It might be easier in a chatbot to expose voice content, but when you're actually reciting content or it's being spoken, that's a very different kind of picture of content than it is from text. And so it introduces all sorts of really interesting complexities and really interesting kinds of considerations that are going to be the focus of my book.
Yeah, just things like the nuance of saying something like please or hey, or the tones of voice. There's so much that goes into this, and that can go into it here and moving into the future. I find it extremely fascinating. I know that you said that you're doing this on, or publishing it on, a book apart, and you were touring with an event apart as well, right?
Yes, that's correct. Actually, I just gave a talk last week for an event apart online together. I've got, assuming that we're able to flatten the curve in the country, I'll be speaking in December, I believe, in San Francisco as well about the very same topic. And this talk is really about not just the implications of voice on content, but also some of the unique ways in which the human dimensions of voice and speech and conversation challenge some of the more mechanical or machine-driven things that we have to think about. One really good example of this is, consider the fact that we have the vast majority of the interfaces that we use are artificial and learned. When it comes to a mouse, we have to learn how to use a mouse. We have to learn how to use the little scroll wheel and what is a left click and what is a right click. Or a keyboard, we have to learn what the QWERTY layout is, or what the Dvorak layout is, or whatever it is. And video game controllers are the same thing, where the A button is, where the B button is, what this button does. I don't play much video games these days, but you know what I mean. But the thing about conversation is that we don't learn how to talk. We don't learn in that same way that we learn how to use a keyboard or how to use a mouse, how to talk. We learn through our natural upbringings and our childhoods and our infancy and our acquisition of language, how to actually speak. And so one of the things that really is of interest to me is the ways in which the presentation of content through voice can introduce certain challenges and certain implications that we need to be very, very careful about when it comes to inclusive design. And one of the examples of this is, think about when you talk with an Alexa or a Google Home device or Cortana or Siri, what's the one thing that is characteristic of all of them? They all have the voice of somebody that you might picture in your mind as a white woman or a white cisgender woman. It's not necessarily a black man or an Asian woman or somebody who is potentially more representative of the actual user who is conversing with this interface. And so the notion that it's not just about the algorithms that drive speech synthesis and speech recognition, but also the algorithms that drive the illustration of the personality and the identity that we're presenting as the face of the interface is a very unique problem to voice in particular. And it's a problem that a lot of other interface designers don't have. And that's one of the big reasons why I'm so interested in voice, is because it really forces us, rather than putting a human face, rather than putting a kind of a machine face on human interactions and human patterns like we do with keyboards and mice, we're actually putting a human face on a machine so it looks, acts, and talks more like us. And what does that mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just the whole anthropomorphizing of these personalities. It's truly fascinating, and the better results we get from this is making sure that companies are doing their due diligence and ensuring that we diversify our teams and that we have a true representation of humanity here.
Absolutely. And I think that's especially important when it comes to the fact that increasingly, obviously, of course, with the kind of reckoning we're having right now on police violence and anti-Blackness and white supremacy and some of these really oppressive structures is, how do we make sure that we're not applying some of the prejudices and some of the problematic notions that we have on the interfaces that we create? It's not just about the face recognition technologies or the image kind of detection capabilities that law enforcement agencies are using. It's also about something as benign as a phone hotline that's using a voice that is presenting a very particular image of that person and that brand and that organization in your head.
Exactly. Yeah. Very well said. Well, Preston, we're getting to the end of the show, and I like to make sure that I have room for two last questions. First question is, what is the best way people could find out more about you? What is your website? What is your Twitter handle? Obviously, we'll have links in the show notes, but for our audience listening on the podcast, how do they find out more about you?
Sure. There's my website is Preston.so, which is, and by the way, in case you're curious, the top level domain is Somalian. Everyone always likes to ask, what is .so? How did you get that domain? It's Somalian. And if you want to read some of my writing, that's at Preston.so/writing. You can also get a hold of me at Preston.so@oracle.com or Preston.so/contact. And I also have a variety of social media that you can get a hold of me on as well. LinkedIn, my name is Preston So, and my Twitter handle is also Preston So. I'm also on GitHub in case you want to reach me there as well.
Excellent. And Preston, last question is, do you have any final words of wisdom for our audience? I'd like to make sure that we provide an opportunity for the guests to say anything that they didn't get a chance to say, or any kind of advice that they could provide.
Sure. I'll make this a rapid fire two-parter because I did forget to do a quick shameless plug, which is I'm actually wearing and repping the shirt of the conference that I help organize in New York City. I work on an amazing team. This is a nonprofit community-led conference. It's called Decoupled Days. And it's the only community-led, volunteer-led, nonprofit headless CMS conference in the world. We have set some amazing goals this year, and we have an exciting speaker lineup. We're going virtual July 22nd to 23rd. Tickets are only $10, and you can find out more information at decoupleddays.com. And then the second thing that I would say is that, it's been a real pleasure to be on this show, Frederick, and it's always so wonderful to be able to share some of my own lived experience, some of the things that I have been working on with a wider audience. And I would encourage everyone who's listening today to think of opportunities that you can help some of the marginalized or underrepresented people in your lives to have this kind of exposure, to provide them with the platform and the raising up and the centering and the uplifting of the voices that we really need. As I just mentioned with my example of voice interfaces, representation really does matter. It's a very, very important phrase. And one of the things that I really want to encourage people to do who are listening is I would love to have everyone give a little bit of thought as to how you can help those people who are in your lives, those friends of yours or those colleagues of yours who haven't been able to get a chance in some of the spotlights that we see. If you've got a BIPOC colleague who hasn't ever been given the limelight or hasn't ever been given that kind of elevation or promotion or visibility that they deserve, think of ways that you can do that, because representation matters. And we want to make sure that the world reflects who we are and isn't just reflecting a certain subset of people or a certain subset of organizations.
Wow. Thank you so much for saying that, Preston. I couldn't have said that better myself. Thank you so much. Great. Preston, again, thank you. Honored to have you on the show. This was really a delight. I'm really, really happy that you accepted our invitation, and just thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I apologize for the noise. I apologize for the slight echo here, but I do hope that this was really a great kind of experience and knowledge share for a lot of you. And I wish you all an amazing next few weeks.
Thank you so much, Preston. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll catch you next time. Take care.